What's up, everyone? I hope you're all having a blessed day. I got back with another banger, and this is one of our best shows of all time, that being Avatar. Specifically, the whole idea of romance. Throughout the entire Avatar, romance is always part and parcel of the story, even though it's not been the main focal point. But this is all about depicting which one was better, the canon, Aang and Katara, or the non-canon but heavily loved and speculated Zutara. Which one was better? People say Zutara makes more sense, and this video is gonna question if that is really the case. Let's get straight into the video.
Avatar The Last Airbender is good at a lot of things, but romance is not its strong point. Aang and Katara have never been that popular, Sokka and Yue are more of a meme than a ship.
That's rough, buddy.
Korra's love triangle was widely thought to be distracting, and Korra and Asami have really only been given the full space to develop in the comics after the show, which is why, looming over all of these is
Zutara. And even though we didn't end up together, it'll never change the fact that you changed my life forever. Zutara Week 2013.
Does she ever say that?
Zutara, the ship, which unlike Yue, refuses to die, bringing together the fiery and brooding Zuko and the caring and Terry Katara. Zutara, by the way, is 5 times more popular on Tumblr than the canon ship, consistently 3 to 4 times more popular on Google Trends, and the only country in the world where Kataang is more popular is Nigeria. Good for them, I suppose. None of this non-canonical nonsense there, but the hype for Zutara will not die. And we have to wonder if maybe, just maybe, don't shoot me, I'm just the messenger, if Zutara would have been better?
You inspire your men to study such foul smut, Commissar? You heretic!
On the face of it, it's very easy to see why people are drawn to Zutara. It's all fire and water, red and blue, opposites attract, the dark and brooding hero and the nurturing feminine heroine. And don't get me wrong, the fan art is gorgeous, like it feels right looking at it. But Zutara shippers will shoot you down if you say, oh, it's just wish fulfillment, it's just aesthetically pleasing. No, they will argue, it's because it is more meaningful than Katara and Aang. So, okay, let's take it seriously. Let's investigate. And to do that, we really have to understand Katara and Zuko as individuals to get to why they might have been better as a couple. Part 1, Katara. The idea that Katara is
Before we do go on part 1, I'm a camp that Zutara really does make sense. And I feel like people love speaking about it because it's an age-old, much-loved trope of the enemies to lovers. Everyone loves the good enemies to lovers. And it's probably more favored compared to the close friends to lovers trope, because naturally you have all the duality, the sparks, the aggression, and then the passion and aggression. People love that, the flair of emotions, and people slowly change over time. It just makes it a lot more dramatic in that way. But in terms of Katara, I feel like her story, it does really make sense why it could work for her, and it probably is more suited to Katara to be with Zuko, which I'm sure will be explained later. But for me, it's never really a problem with Katara. It's more a case that by having Zutara, I think for me it would somewhat belittle or diminish Zuko's story as a whole, like redemption kind of thing. Because the idea of Zuko is that he was a troubled person who was working over his own trauma from his childhood. His uncle supported him, but he still made the mistakes on his own. But then it's through remembering those lessons, reflecting, and looking inwards to himself that he was able to change and shape his own destiny on his own. And he came to that decision effectively on his own in the end. By adding the element of a love interest is why it happened, it diminishes it because now he no longer made it a journey of personal discovery and change for himself. It's now he's changing because of a girl. Which is it can work in a lot of other stories, but if that was the case, he wouldn't be regarded, for me personally, at the same level as he is now, as people easily put him like one of the best characters in all of fiction. So if him doing on his own puts him on here like a playing field like here, him doing this of a girl kind of drops it here. Still a good character, still the story can work, but it doesn't reach the same heights because changing because of personal discovery and your own choice is much more deeper and more nuanced and intricate than changing because of a girl. But that's just my opinion. Let's see what he has to say about Katara, because I'm not even against it, to be fair, on a Katara's end, but let's check it out.
suited to Zuko is deeply rooted in her character arc. When we first meet her, she is the lone waterbending survivor of a genocide perpetuated by the Fire Nation, and only a survivor because her mother sacrificed her life to save her. With her father gone off to fight in the war, we very quickly come to understand Katara has had to mature not only far quicker than she should have ever had to, but far quicker than her brother Sokka, who cosplays as the man of the house while she's taken on real responsibility.
You're on your own!
That's her explosion at the start of the show, which triggers the iceberg. This childhood trauma has given her an unyielding hatred for the Fire Nation, and you know what? Fair enough. But the primary representative of the Fire Nation in her life and the story quickly becomes Zuko. In the second episode, he invades her home, demands Katara hand over Aang, only for Aang to sacrifice himself for her village, and she's thinking, oh great, more people sacrificing themselves for me. We see Katara looking on, tears in her eyes, and this isn't just her being afraid for a friend, but what must have felt like a repeat of the night her mother died. Not to mention, Zuko being the prince of the Fire Nation makes him, in her eyes, one and the same with the state apparatus which wiped out her people and killed her mother. And that unyielding hatred also manifests in an intensely emotional streak, which pops up all throughout the story, and it's something that Katara is often mocked for. But she's got this sense of justice and empathy, which often comes out in righteous anger throughout the series. But it also manifests in something else, in this intense feeling of loneliness. In one of the best scenes in the series, Sokka admits that he can't really remember his mother's face, that in her place he saw Katara's. Katara, on the other hand, has very concrete memories of her mother and carries that pain in a way Sokka has never had to, especially since she had to fill those shoes. It's lonely to be the adult where your friends and siblings get to be the children. Like The Runaways, an episode where everyone kind of craps on Katara for not being fun, but the episode isn't really about Toph versus Katara. That's a very surface level way of looking at it. It's more about how Katara has had to be the adult in the room for her whole life. She's had to manage the risk of being discovered. Over and over, she's had to take initiative and responsibility faster than everyone else. Everyone gets to have fun, but only because she doesn't. And I think this manifests in why some people prefer Zutara. Aang feels tangibly more childlike in his mannerisms, his humor, his arguable naivete for much of the series. There's a big maturity gap between these two, something which doesn't feel like so much of a problem with Katara and Zuko, even if the age difference between the two is identical. But it is more than that. Like, as the last waterbender of her tribe, Katara carries the weight of her culture.
I do have to agree with that part, though. In terms of sheer emotional depth, Katara being slightly older is a lot more mature than Aang, and in terms of emotion, she's more expressive in terms of her passions, her heart, and how she loves is much more closer to somebody, not to really go well with Aang. Not to say, but to be fair, that only really applies to the earlier seasons. Aang does change a lot in terms of season 3. Even in the second half of season 2, I'll even say so, but Kang will always be that fun-loving guy at the end of the day. That's just who he is as a person, which is less about him being not mature, but more about his character being one of freedom and living like being free effectively as part of air nomad. Air nomads past like just how air nomads are brought up to be. The whole air nomads in terms of the element of air. That's more a reflection than that, rather than lacking the maturity, I would definitely say.
Legacy on her shoulders. Her identity is wrapped up in her genetic capacity to carry on an important part of her culture. She's been raised to keep this part of herself, her power suppressed, with no access to training or waterbending masters, no knowledge of her culture. We also learned that each of the water tribes have their own distinct waterbending styles and philosophies, and Katara has to carry all of that while being cut off from it for most of her life. It's no wonder that Katara steals that waterbending scroll in the first season. People simplify this episode to Katara just being jealous of Aang, being naturally good at her thing, and stealing the scroll to get the better of him. But the scroll also represents the first exposure she's had to her own culture. Of course she's fascinated. All of this meant that Katara had a childhood where being kind and nurturing was rewarded while expressing her power was frowned on. And if this sounds opposite to someone else, you're right, and we will get to that. Katara's character arc is primarily about reckoning with that past, connecting with her culture by realizing her abilities and processing her grief and loss of her childhood. We see that in the waterbending scroll, how she learns water healing with Zhong, and how she challenges Paku at the end of the season, especially because here, Katara is not just fighting for herself, but her culture. Like in the Southern Water Tribe, women are allowed to be soldiers, where in the North, they're only allowed to be healers. She wants to find her place in her culture. This journey with grief and rage and her ancestors is probably best explored though in The Puppet Master, where Katara meets Hama, another survivor of the Southern Water Tribe genocide, and a bloodbender who uses her waterbending to take revenge on the ordinary people of the Fire Nation. This episode is primarily posited as an exploration of the philosophical ethics of waterbending, as Katara learns to draw moisture from the air, from blood, from plants. But it's also a choice. How is she meant to channel her grief and rage over the loss of her people? Does she become like Hama and take vengeance, or does she find another way forward? She's always considered waterbending
The
as this
depth in these
life-giving,
Avatar
healing
characters
power,
is
but
so
here she gets to see it in a
incredible.
new light as this darker, extractive power she now has. Does she risk using this dark, raw power? How does it change how she views herself? But this emotional journey we see her on is also explored through her relationship with Zuko. Both as her antagonist and later ally, Zuko steals her necklace, the one memento she has connecting her to her mother and culture, and there are all these little details which to the Zutara eye probably looks like they're hinting at something further down the line.
I'll save you from the pirates.
All of this coming together in the now iconic catacomb scene in the climax of Season 2, which Zutara shippers will never let you forget.
You have no idea what this war has put me through. Me personally. The Fire Nation took my mother away from me.
I'm sorry.
It's very true. I never thought about it today, but this generally might be the most vulnerable Katara is in the entire series. It's not with Sokka, it's not with Aang, it's with Zuko, her enemy. It's quite interesting when you really put it that way, where you can see why the relationship does make more sense. Katara is not vulnerable like this with anybody else in the series, which would typically be what you would say is the lovers would feel. But she's able to do it with Zuko. It's quite interesting. I would really like anyone to let me know if there's a moment in the series where Katara is more vulnerable than in this particular situation. She literally breaks down in tears. The only other time that happens is when maybe she bloodbeds for the first time and then they console her, but she's not bawling out in tears. That's more of like a sadness, and this rather than this is actually like a breakdown, and it's with Zuko. So maybe Zutara fans are onto something.
That's something we have in common.
And her journey involves meeting people like Haru and Jet to help her feel less alone in her grief, who all lost parents to the Fire Nation in some way. And each of them also help Katara grapple with how she's meant to manage her own feelings. Katara is the heart of the group. This is like the trope of the emotional and moral one who always stands up for what's right, who helps you when you're down, who offers hope and pushes people to be better. Imprisoned is an underrated Katara-centric episode where she literally gets herself arrested and taken to Guantanamo Bay just so she could literally lead a revolution with the power of hope. Her role in the story is to see the best in people all the time, to help them to be better. And this moment in the catacombs is kind of the ultimate test of that part of her character, because it's finally forcing her to empathize with the ultimate symbol of that pain that she has, right? She fully admits that when she imagines the face of the enemy, she sees Zuko's. That here, she starts to see herself in him. And his ability to understand her grief and pain leads them into the Southern Raiders, where Katara goes on to face her mother's killer, Yon-Ra, with Zuko. This episode is fundamentally about whether she can find a healthier way to process her trauma, and she does, sort of. She may not forgive Yon-Ra or anything, but she does realize that she's channeled her trauma and pain into blind rage at Zuko, and so forgives him. In so many ways, Katara's journey with loss and trauma is directly connected to her ability to connect with Zuko, and Zutara shippers really love this idea. In the same way we all kind of love when two characters who might hate each other honestly find something of themselves in the other person. Zuko moves from the object of Katara's inner turmoil to being something more. We love this idea. In the same way we all kind of love when two characters who might hate each other honestly find something of themselves in the other person. Zuko moves from the object of Katara's inner turmoil to...
I just wanted to pause it here, purely because from watching all the Freera videos, it really goes to show how important this scene is in terms of placement. And I completely agree with Zutara shippers when you really analyze the situation in Katara's perspective. They have, in terms of, they've got so much more in common than Aang and Katara. They both have that sibling dynamic with, obviously, you have Zuko being the oldest brother to Azula, while Katara is a younger sister to Sokka. They both understand and have the feeling of having a strong connection to their mother, and then losing it both at a young age. They're both benders, so they understand what it means to have that kind of level of power, which also is a nice little nod on the things. Even what makes characters so great is their dualities between each other, and there's just so much going on, which just makes their connection so much meaningful. Like everything from the verbal and the non-verbal. Look at this placement. As watching the Freedom videos, everything is done so intentionally. Notice how more space is Katara is closer to Zuko. They're not in the dead center of the video. She's physically taking a step closer to Zuko, getting closer to him, which also shows and represents how they've got closer in a relationship. So both physically and mentally, how she puts her hand here in such a comforting way, and number of non-verbal showing of their romantic connection. Their eyes, how they look at each other. She's looking up to him, he's looking up. This is very intimate. Anytime when characters are this close to each other, just look at each other, this is very intimate. I would argue being able to do this with somebody for an extended period of the time is more closer and more intimate than a simple kiss. It just makes perfect sense when you analyze it in this perspective.
Being something more. If empathizing with Zuko and then forgiving him were both fundamental parts of her arc, symbols of how far she's come, then we have to ask, and Zutara shippers will ask, well, what might happen next? What's the natural conclusion? Resentment and, of course, no honor.
Honor, honor, my honor, my honor.
And we very quickly come to understand
Zuko
where this
love
has
his
come
honor.
from. He was banished by the Father Lord after protesting sending new recruits to die, and then refusing to fight his father in the Agni Kai, and instead begging forgiveness. He was raised in an environment where restraint and empathy and kindness and love were punished as weakness, while strength and action and taking up his place in the culture were rewarded. His father permanently scars him as a reminder of that weakness. There's an interesting panel in the comics set after the series where Zuko asks his father for advice. He asks Ozai what the right thing for the Fire Lord to do is, and Ozai basically says, hey, whatever the Fire Lord does is right by nature because it is the Fire Lord doing it.
Not to worry, I have a permit. This just says I can do what I want.
It's not the best comic, but
just on that, I have actually heard that quite before, that it really elements the idea of what it means to be a king and a leader, with characters like Gilgamesh explains in the Fate series, Fate Babylon particularly, as well as the whole rider conversation in the meeting of the three kings of Gilgamesh, Arthur, and Iskander himself. I have to do a video about looking at kings, what it means to be a king, but let's keep on going. Does
illuminate something interesting, because in other words, it's not just that Ozai wanted to punish Zuko for his empathy, but for Zuko backing down and reconsidering anything that he might have wanted to do at all, instead of doubling down, being even more aggressive, asserting himself at any cost. The idea that he might think he was wrong and reconsider a decision is the same as weakness. If all of this sounds diametrically opposite to Katara, you are starting to get the point. It is all about symmetry. Zuko, we come to realize, has built up this facade of bravado and aggression to try and be more like his father. His dark and brooding aura isn't just a symptom of his misery, but him actively trying to suppress the lighter and kinder and happier parts of his personality. And a character in this sort of position often needs external forces to help break down that hard exterior and deconstruct it. And this is mostly Uncle Iroh, right? Pushing Zuko to ask himself, who is he outside of the identity his father gave him?
Who are you?
And what do you want?
But guess who else is a positive force for change and optimism in other people's lives, who can see through the dark and brooding exterior to perceive just maybe who really lies beneath, who helps people feel good about themselves when they feel inadequate, who is the first person to offer hand when they've been kicked down? It's, of course, Ty Lee, but also Katara, right? Right at the start, even when they barely knew each other, the audience could see these.
I told you, that is exactly why I would say is the biggest reason why it shouldn't work. Because then, as I said earlier in the video, it becomes Zuko changes because /for the girl, not because Zuko changes because and for himself, and that is because he understands now that is the right thing to do. Very important.
The dynamics forming, that they kind of just made sense. They felt good. It felt like Katara was going to fill Zuko's hole. In that iconic catacomb scene where she suggests she could heal his scar to take away the symbol of his shame to free him to become someone else, we get it. At the most critical point of his arc, who is there to try and push Zuko in just the right direction but Katara? And the audience just froths over that. Zuko's arc is about learning to separate his identity from his father's approval and the Fire Nation, to reckon with others he and his people have hurt, and to find healthier ways of dealing with his trauma. We get glimpses of Zuko's sincerity and kindness scattered throughout the first season, in The Storm and the Siege in the North, when he offers to save Zhao, but he's mostly unapologetic. He sees himself as someone who's had to struggle to fight for what he has alone. Unlike Aang or Azula, they were born lucky, he was lucky to be born. It's only when he's declared a traitor at the start of season 2 that he really starts to consider, hey, maybe my father doesn't love me. And who else is he going to be outside of being the banished prince? He starts to deconstruct this idea that the Fire Nation is spreading their prosperity to the world, as he has to live and coexist with the very people his country has hurt. The girl with the scarred leg, the villagers, Jet, and eventually Katara, who he has hurt himself. But an equally important part of this journey is how it forces him to be vulnerable. We see in the Blue Spirit, this moment where he realizes that Aang has saved him, he lashes out. Not just to try and capture him, but because he's allergic to seeming weak. The moment he begins to let himself be vulnerable with anyone, including with Uncle Iroh, he leaves on his own, unwilling to accept that path forward. He can't let anyone see him that way. He has a similar moment after the fight with Azula where Iroh goes down and Katara offers to help. He lashes out again. He doesn't want to accept help because he thinks it makes him look weak. But Season 2 drags Zuko down to his lowest point, forces him to be dependent on others for housing and food and help, and in all of this, at his lowest point, he is open to the greatest change. He starts to empathize again with the vulnerability of others and sees the true reality of the Fire Nation's war. Zuko Alone is an interesting episode because Zuko turns up to this village where nobody knows who he is. He's not the banished prince. He's not the prince with the scar. Everyone has scars here. He's just some random refugee. He gets to toy with the idea of being someone who isn't Zuko, who doesn't have to be strong all the time. There's no risk to being vulnerable when people don't know who he is, and he allows himself to help others, to see that it's okay when they're in a vulnerable position too. We also finally come to see how he lost his mother, creating yet another parallel with Katara. We see him as someone deprived of motherly love, and guess who regularly takes on the role of camp mom and is kind and healing and understanding? We also see in Zuko Alone how Zuko reimagines himself as his mother's son.
Son of Ursa and Fire Lord Ozai.
He said his mother's name first, reimagining himself through the lens of this caring woman, that he has that in him too. And we see that conflict kind of go on further in Season 3. We learn about the Avatar and the Fire Lord, that he has these two sides to him through his mother and his father, and just needs the right person to bring it all out. It's like he knows there's something missing in him and he needs someone to fill it. I wonder who. And all of this leads him to the catacombs, where he finds Katara, where he feels weak and defeated and vulnerable, and he finally seems open to accepting help from who else but Katara. The two bond, and it seems to the moment that this might be the final push he needs to change permanently. But no, sorry. He betrays them, makes things worse, and falls back into old ways. All of this pretty much makes Katara the final boss of Zuko's redemption.
It's a white flag, and you may as well start waving it right now.
The only thing I will be waving is your decapitated head on a stick in front of your weeping mother.
Good Lord.
Earning her trust is about as symbolically significant as it can possibly get. Katara being someone from a culture that the Fire Nation has brutalized, being someone that Zuko himself has personally victimized multiple times, and this all leads us to the Southern Raiders, which we've already covered from Katara's perspective, but from Zuko's, this whole episode set up is a radical act of empathy, right? Like at the start of the episode, Katara is wrapped up in her pain and grief and guilt, all things that Zuko knows incredibly well, and Aang tries to press Katara to just forgive Yonra, to move on, but Zuko says, hey, no, she needs to face him. She needs to face him the way that I faced my father. It's not that she necessarily needs to take revenge, but she needs to find a way to process that anger and those memories, and that can mean at least facing the person. So much of Zuko's journey has been about trying to find healthy ways to deal with his own problems, which really all built up to that moment with his father during the eclipse. And this is that moment for Katara, a moment only Zuko really seems to understand. Zuko's arc doesn't peak when he faces...
Very, very, very good section there of another reason why this ship does make sense. Both of their journeys really like almost climax in their face, and then they directly in opposition or directly confronting the person who they believe is the source of their pain, source of their trauma, source of their grief. And through that, they're able to have once yet again another shared connection experience, what's only unique to them compared to any other character in the series. No one else has to directly face the person who was responsible but these two, which makes it very, very interesting in terms of that emotional connection and depth to their characters, which does make sense. But, like I said, let's continue.
Ozai. It peaks when he's able to use his newfound perspective to help Katara in a way nobody else has yet been able to. Just as she sees herself in him, he sees himself in her. Symmetry. And all of this comes together when it's Katara and Zuko who go to fight Azula. Zuko even willingly sacrificing himself for her, and her being the only person in the world who could possibly heal him. The metaphors abound.
Very true. The perfect duality. Fire and water, they are the opposites for a reason. But do opposites really ever attract? I don't know. But the connection between them does make sense, I can't lie.
About writing romance and shipping characters together, we're often talking about how they complement each other's strengths and weaknesses, how they fill in the gaps in each other to find deeper meaning through each other, a two-way relationship of give and take. And for Zutara shippers, it's symmetry and parallels and intrigue galore. Where Katara is raised to suppress her power and always put others before herself, Zuko is raised to embrace power and view kindness as weakness. Where Katara needs someone to help her process her grief and trauma and anger more healthily, Zuko needs someone who can teach him to love by first loving him. We've got two characters who both struggle to channel their anger and trauma in healthy ways. If you want to get Freudian, we've got a sad boy who misses his mum and a motherly woman who just can't help mothering every sad boy she meets. Where Katara's arc is all about reconnecting with her culture, Zuko's is all about asking who he is outside of his. Katara's kindness and empathy tempers Zuko's anger, and Zuko's proactiveness inflames Katara's sense of righteousness. Zuko is literally scarred, Katara is the magical healer. Zuko starts his journey to become a better man by learning a waterbending technique and lightning redirection, but it's also him who helps her realize she shouldn't rely on bloodbending, a darker power. And most of all, both of their arcs fundamentally peak with how they relate to each other in the same episode. True love might just seem like the natural next step, a love which isn't just based on attraction or circumstance, but mutual respect and understanding. Not to mention the other parallels which just make it seem like they're destined for each other. Zuko becomes the blue spirit using a mask we now know comes from, guess what, a dark water tribe spirit, while Katara poses as the painted lady, a Fire Nation spirit. In both cases, Katara and Zuko use their spirit disguises to do something that they couldn't as their normal selves, almost yin-yang, like there's a bit of fire in Katara's water and a bit of water in Zuko's fire, something only satisfied in maybe finding each other, and something Zutara shippers have absolutely clung to. And I do not blame Zutara shippers for putting this yin-yang stuff in their art all the time, because like, it looks gorgeous. Not to mention, it shows up in the show. Fire and water are on opposite sides. Guess what? Opposites also mean that there's more conflict.
Can I just say how amazing, when you actually really look at it, like, it's almost indisputable. Like, the amount of dualities of the relationship is so layered and intricate, but so perfectly intertwined and connecting. It's incredible. I'm not gonna lie. As I wouldn't be against it happening. It happening does make perfect sense. But I always just reiterate back to the idea that if this was happened, it wouldn't have made it wouldn't have made the story bad, but it would definitely have detracted from what Zuko ultimately ends up being. It's really depends what you want. Do you want to have a greater element? Do you want to have a greater element of how relationships? You want to focus on the aspect of how relationships or bonds can build people up together to become better together, or do you want to be focused on more two individuals can be cohabit space and they can both individually grow because of each other, and more emphasize the element of self-reflection and self realization? Do you want to focus on the bonds and the connections, or do you want to focus on the personal development, change, and understanding yourself aspect? Both can work, but I feel like this one does take it more better individually.
And I think this is fundamentally why so many people are attracted to Zutara over Kataang. It's just more exciting. People like conflict. They like enemies to lovers. There's only one bed, doomed.
But this video's gone on way too long. Part 1 and 2, I really enjoy it. We'll save the conflict for the next video. If you guys really want to see it, hit that like button. I'll definitely do it. This video is very interesting, and I've yapped on enough for this video, so let me save you the trouble. Like and subscribe, and the next part will hopefully come as soon as possible. But till next time, ciao.